I work at Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens, and I am the adult education program manager. I design the adult education curriculum, basically 80 or so classes between March and November. I also run a horticultural therapy program and at the Garden of the Five Senses. And I have been doing landscape designing for, I guess it's been 15 years now. And Michael Dixon, who's here. He is my brother, and that's how he says a long, long time ago, and way back when. And one time, Michael said to me when I was gardening in my mother's garden, he said, "I think you're going to make a career out of this." So I am grateful that my brother had the insight because at the time I did not. So thanks, Mike. All right, so I just wanted to show you lots of pictures. I am very enthusiastic and passionate about this. I hope I don't wear you out, but there are opportunities here that I wanted to I'm going to show you a slideshow that, but there are opportunities that I wanted to bring to your awareness of what you can actually grow as edibles. Granted, not year round, unless you freeze them or you put them in some kind of preserve cellar of sorts. And although what some of you had said were not natives, it's wonderful that you're taking advantage of your perennial crops. And that is really what a good focus is to kind of grow what is a perennial rather than having to till your soil over and over and over. But when you have, arugula or carrots, sometimes it has to happen. But I just wanted to open up the opportunities of what native edibles can provide in your landscape. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going. And Erica, if you can unmute and just let me know it's starting to load up from beginning. So
it still has all the stuff around.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
There it is. All right.
Okay. So thank you for joining, and let's get started. So actually, this is not just for native edibles for us, but for not just pollinators either, but for wildlife in general. And that is something that some people feel is a bone of contention. But if we have a diverse amount of our native edibles, then we won't have devastation of our native edibles. First, what is a native? This has become a subject matter that is, I don't want to say tenuous, but oftentimes contentious, where people are like, back and forth about what the definition is. So I just wanted to give you a very open and broad concept of what a native plant is in the context of plants. Plants that are indigenous from post-glacial or volcanic activity to a region without human intervention, traditionally viewed before colonization, and co-evolved over millennia with region's animals, insects, amphibians, bacteria, and fungi. There are continental natives, there are biome natives, there are ecoregion natives, and so forth, and meaning that it all depends on how local you want to get. So while we have lots of natives that are referred to as North American natives, are they actually natives to Maine or to the region of Maine? Because it's not about states, it's about the region, the ecosystem. Plants show adaptations, and when reproduced by seed, there is more genetic diversity, which provides a wider nutritional diet for wildlife and for us. And that's what natives, or all together, just plants in general, when they are reproducing from seed, they're becoming more diverse and more adaptive to the changes in our climate. When you buy cloned or cultivated plants, these are plants that are not genetically diverse. So natives, if you're getting a straight native, you are getting a genetically diverse plant. Plants growing in alpine regions of Maine develop a bit differently from those same botanically referenced in a river valley, yet variety or provenance becomes the distinguishing factor. So if we have a native plant growing on the top of Katahdin, and maybe it's an alpine strawberry, and yet we can get alpine, what they refer to as alpine strawberries, actually growing in lower elevations, the adaptation and the performance of that plant is very different from the relative on the higher elevations. So I just want to give you some of that concept of how you perhaps will integrate native plants into your landscape, where they're going to be relevant in your landscape. This is, by the way, that was an image of a chickadee with a bit of larva in it. And if any of you are not familiar with Doug Tallamy, I strongly recommend becoming familiar with a gentleman by the name of Doug Tallamy. He is a ecologist and botanist at the University of Delaware, and he came out with an amazing book called the Nature's Best Hope and the nature in your backyard. And these are wonderful books that have become favored by many people who didn't really understand the concept of native plants until he brought the ornithologists in. When he brought the bird lovers in, then native became relevant. Native became a real thing, because with native plants, we see all these insects. And if you're not familiar, there's an international decline of insects because of all of our pesticides that we have added into our landscapes. Now there's a resurgence of bringing natives back in that actually attract these native plants to attract native insects, so that then the native birds who have co-evolved with the whole system are also supported. Without these insects, we will not have our birds. I'm curious if anyone can put in the chat box if they've actually ever milled their own white or red oak acorn flower. I'm very curious if anyone's ever done that. It has a very high carbohydrate content that will, I don't know if you've ever read the book The Tree. It talks about the plethora of what oaks were used for speaking of colonists and those who were traveling, throughout the continent, and they would have oak flour bread, and they were filled for the 2 days while they were hiking around. So it's pretty amazing how dense the carbohydrates in oak flour is. So why is it valuable to add native or indigenous plants into our landscape, particularly edible? Well, fresh, healthy, tasty food right in your backyard. Food for the indigenous wildlife, including the pollinators, the insect larvae, birds, and other mammals. Growing and harvesting native plants from the land that you live deepens your connection to nature, connects the family and community to a positive and rewarding experience, such as what Ella and Erica are doing. Growing locally is so rewarding. Growing and harvesting native plants from the land that you live on leads to increased sustainability and food security. It contributes to biodiversity and reduces soil carbon release. And if any of you are in the times of soil carbon, you may be familiar with the concept of carbon sequestration. And so the more perennial you can grow, the reduced amount of tilling you will need, therefore the reduction of carbon release. There's good carbon, but we have had too much of it. So we're going to go a little bit beyond just our traditional blueberries, but this is a low bush blueberry community at Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens, and they are not the same that grow in wetlands, of which high bush blueberry are traditionally grown. Low bush blueberry prefers to be in very gritty, dry, xeric kind of soils with a peaty substrate as the humus layer. So it's a really great material for ground cover, as many of you are familiar with, possibly with Appleton and driving along Route 131 and seeing those blueberry hills, just gorgeous in the fall. Those are soils that are in upland areas, so they're not going to be growing in the same kind of environment as their high bush blueberry family members. Then I want to think about black Huckleberry, Galusacea baccata. So I'm going to use botanical names. This looks very similar to that of high bush blueberry. It's just a little shorter. And when you get to look at the berries themselves close up, they're black. And when you taste them, they are tart as heck. They're not yummy to taste raw. You have to really cook them down and add maybe some sweetener of sorts, either honey or maple sugar, and then it will help digest it a little bit better for your purposes. It's a very bitter taste, although we know bitter is very good for our bodies as well. And I meant to say that huckleberry grows in very similar conditions as that of the low bush blueberry, where it's very dry, kind of gritty soils. And you'll see it on the upland edges of, say, Mount Patty or Bradbury Mountain sometimes. It has this gorgeous, brilliant red fall color. It's just amazing. And then speaking of fall color, we have the Vaccinium Macrocarpon, which is bog cranberry. You don't need a bog to grow cranberry. It's just the concept of harvesting that our generic uses of harvesting have developed so that we call it bog cranberry. They actually grow on mountainsides, very similar to that of low bush blueberry. They grow very fast, so a wonderful ground cover for you. The bees, I mean, anything in the vaccinium world, the bees go crazy for. And so they're really great for your early pollination opportunities. And those berries themselves, you want them to look maroon practically before you actually eat them. When they're this bright red, they're still way too tart for you, and oftentimes very, tough to even eat. But what's such beautiful flowers when you can get up close and admire those features. Wonderful for ledge or rock garden opportunities. Then we have Fergari of Virginia, our woodland strawberry. This is what we often see growing in our lawn, and you think it's a weed. Again, this is something that if you actually let it be and you don't mow it year after year and you let it be in your garden, it will produce these flowers, and then the next year they typically will produce the fruit. They usually need to have a really strong root system and plentiful amount of flowers for the pollination to occur, for then the fruit to develop. But these little berries have a lot of punch to give. Very, very flavorful. And I'm sure some of you are very familiar with it. Sometimes people think of it as a creeping cinquefoil, but this is a woodland strawberry. And again, growing in soils that can be very disturbed soils. So you'll see that with some plants that are just like in that process of redeveloping or regrowing in a successional environment of a disturbed environment, and then the strawberries will be right underneath at their foot. Look at that beautiful little berry. It's only like a half an inch thick. And then we have American hazelnut, Corylus americana. This is a hedgerow of it, believe it or not. So you could use this as a privacy border. What more can you ask as a privacy border for summertime interest? And then you will get, and by the way, look at that fall color, but then you will get these wonderful hazelnuts. The thing is, we see these naturally occurring in our understory, and so we don't really get to see the production of the nut itself because the sunlight isn't ample. Yet if you have them right on the forest's edge, these produce these beautiful nuts, and for you to then roast later on. These pink flowers are actually just starting to occur in the landscape right now. And the way in which I learned about this pink flower was by practically poking my eye out. And then I noticed it and I was like, oh my God, what is this amazing pink flower? And then I did my research and there it was. So the pink is the female flower, and then the catkins are the male. So the female is what you're going to see producing the nuts, whereas the catkins, which you oftentimes get confused with when you see alders or maybe birch trees, it's a very similar catkin feature on these shrubs, and they grow about 12 to 15 feet tall. Rhonia melanocarpa. Perhaps you're familiar with this when you go to Rising Tide or a health food store and it says chokeberry juice, you know? Well, this stuff is higher in antioxidants than any high bush blueberry or any blueberry you'll ever find. Very dense, again, practically like that of a blackberry, but a bit more luscious. And again, very tart, so important to mix it in with some kind of sweetener. You could even add pulverized mint into the juice, and that will help kind of make it a little more digestible for you. But beautiful flowers. This blooms in April to, excuse me, early May. And it's the black chokeberry. I meant to write black. We do have a partner or a sister of this named red chokeberry, but we don't really see red chokeberry north of York County. So those of you in Arlington, Jean and Bonnie in Lexington, you'll definitely see more of the red chokeberry. Here it is, black chokeberry there. I have it in my vegetable garden. I will say I only have a few of them, and guess who likes them too? Deer. So you definitely want to make sure you have plenty of these in order to keep everybody happy. And these do grow relatively fast and very economical. I could envision these, Rosie, right by the cattails, by that wetland over there, because they do like to grow in wet, on the edge of wet fresh water. Actually, I've seen them at Gilsland Farm as well in Falmouth, and they're right on the upland portion of the brackish marshland there. And then here's the flower for you. And then we have this wonderful Amelanchier. And Amelanchier, excuse me, I have to move. My cord is, my iPad is about to die. You know what's funny? It's the curse. The curse, Erica. Okay, so here we go. Amelanchier serviceberry. This is a berry that is producing in July, whereas a lot of these other berries that I was just talking to you about actually produce more so in September or thereabouts. Whereas this is one of the first ones, so the birds just go right for it as soon as it starts, just start to color up a little bit more. You'll also notice this as, or know this as Shad Bush, which is related to the fact that these flower, these beautiful white flowers at the time of which the shad are running. There's the dainty little flower in the spring. And so Amelanchier is the genus, and it has all these species. So there's Laevis, Arborea. So you want to learn about what species you're looking towards, which would be more, you know, what are the ones that actually are noticeably growing in your landscape nearby. And oftentimes that will be about size or just a little variation in the timing, like maybe a week later or a week earlier. But for the most part, they only flower for about a week and a half, and then the berries come a month and a half later. And you can grow these in wettish areas as much as somewhat of an upland area. Although the wetter, I won't say the wetter, but the more spring, ephemeral, vernal environment that it can grow in, the better off it will be throughout the rest of the growing season. In this case, it's growing amongst, believe it or not, a mixture of low bush blueberry with Aronia. There's a plethora, and that's the other thing about nature is when you have diverse plants, they are all serving different functions of how much moisture they're taking up at different times of the year. So the more diverse your selection is in which you're growing, the better off the stability of the environment it's going to be. Here it is, and those white flowers. If you go to Acadia in about 2.5 weeks, or Mount Desert Island, you'll be seeing these flowering. I don't know, Jean. Let us know if in the chat if you see these flowering down by you at this time. They're just budded at CMBG right now. We also have Gulfperia procumbens, wintergreen, teaberry. What an incredible ground cover once it's established. It does take quite a bit of time for it to get established. And again, it grows with low bush blueberry. So one of those plants that grow very effectively in drier conditions, although with a little humusy and peat of a ground cover, of a soil type, I should say. and evergreen. And then again, the early blooming time helps our bumblebees. And I don't know if you're familiar with the fact that bumblebees are native, and bumblebees are the workforce for our pollinators, our early pollinators, aside from our mason bees. Those delicious little berries are edible. You can make them into your tea or your chewing gum, whichever you prefer. And jams, for that matter. So the leaves and the berries are edible. And in this case, many of you, as you probably saw from Erica's excited posts on Instagram, elderberry, we're so excited for elderberry. And so is this black-cap bird here. This is budded right now in our landscape right now at this time of the year, and it will start to bloom in late June, early July, and then the berries will come out in late August, early September. And you, again, anything that berries bodaciously like this, you want to keep an eye on if you want to preserve majority of those berries, or like I prefer, plant plentifully enough of them, and then you'll have enough for the birds and for yourself. Here we have the Lindera benzoin, northern spice bush. And this one has edible leaves as well as the berries, but the berries are used only when you can cook them. So don't eat them raw, whereas the leaves you can eat as they're just emerging. And that's traditional to many plants, believe it or not. They're much more edible just as they're emerging in the spring when their greens haven't built up enough of their anthocyanins or anything. They won't be tough and a little bitter. So it's better off to eat them at their earlier stages of their development. What a beautiful, this is actually blooming right now out in our landscape. And the berries will develop. You won't know the berries until you have a female shrub. It's like northern bayberry or winterberry. You can have one male and you can have 10 females, but there are very few times in which you can actually find a female. And this is its fall color. And these grow about 10 to 15 feet as well. Wonderful for hedging. And in this case, they're using the berries for these biscuits. And the best part of this shrub is it is a host, the specific host to this specific swallowtail called the spice bush swallowtail. And when you look at the shrub, and if you ever see the shrub's leaves curled up like this, you just peel it apart a little bit and you can see this little green guy in there. And these are called false eyes. The head is actually what's curled underneath. These are the false eyes. It's to mimic that of a snake to the bird. So it prevents the birds from wanting to feed on it. Although there are some birds that have figured it out. Then this is its next stage in its larval point where it's just about to molt and it's turning orange. And I found this northern spice bush swallowtail in Freeport after I planted about 10 spice bushes the year before, and then all of a sudden it's just amazing. You plant it and they will come. It's really that remarkable. Although it's creeping on a crabgrass right there, so it's kind of ironic. And this is the flower. This is the butterfly in which it develops into. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And then a relative to this plant is Sassafras Albidium. This is the mitten tree. And again, these leaves are very edible at the time of which they're just starting to emerge, and they have a spiciness to them as well. Sometimes sweet, sometimes a little citron flavored, or lime, citrus, whatever. I'm using French and English and I'm going back and forth in my head. Anyways, but these flowers are just gorgeously chartreuse. And then these are an edge tree, so they'll grow right on the forest edge, and they become these suckering trees. They're not one single stem. You'll expect once you have one, you will have a multitude of them. And again, this is a host to this particular kind of sassafras larva here. Here are the developing seed heads. The fall color is amazing, just gorgeous. So really, if you're going to be eating this, you eat the leaves at the stage at which it's just starting to really emerge out of that, 2 weeks, 3 weeks of growth from dormancy. And then this is our native flowering raspberry, okay? This actually produces little raspberries. They're not as necessarily sweet as our, or I should say, sweet tart mixture as the ones that we produce in the crops. However, it does definitely produce some good sweetness. And it's also what I love about it is it's a warding mechanism to deer. So if you want to kind of deter deer to feeding on some other things, put some Rubus odoratus in front of it. It has thorns. It's they call it a thornless, but it's really not thornless. It's just more of a hairy thornless. So it's not as harsh to touch. Then we have common persimmon. Not necessarily very well known, but these do grow in our Zone 5 area. If you live north of Zone 5, you probably won't be able to grow these. But you wait till these have produced their fruits. You want to get 2 persimmon if you want to get your fruits. And these will produce in September, October. And I love that bark, really gorgeous bark. And again, these can grow up to about 30 feet tall, but in an orchard environment, you typically let them stay at a 15, 20 foot high maximum. And then I was sharing this little story with my brother the other day, yellow birch. Yellow birch, when you take the little branches, the young branches of yellow birch, and you want to figure out, is this truly a yellow birch? Besides looking at that copper bark in the center here, you actually can chew on the young branching and just suck on it a little bit. And if you start to taste that wintergreen or spearmint flavor, then you know it's yellow birch. And there's black birch, which is Betula lenta, and that's also going to have a little bit of a spearmint, but it's sweeter. It's not as pepperminty. It definitely has a sweeter flavor in the branching itself. You can also see the differences of a black birch on the left that has a much more solid bark with these strong creases or cuts in the bark, whereas the yellow birch is going to be more of this peeling and coppery color. And I forgot to say, you can tap these birches for birch beer. This is what originally birch beer was produced by. Then we have our wonderful sumacs. This is our common sumacs. We have the staghorn sumac to the left, and then we have smooth leaf sumac. This is not poisonous sumac. I want to make that totally clear. This has no relationship to that. When it develops as a young stalk, I've heard some people say that it has a little milky residue. So if some people get milky residue at the stage at which they touch the plant when it's young, yes, you could have a little contact dermatitis, but nothing major. But these are for these wonderful panicle berries that are very furry. So it takes a long time for a specific bird like this robin to let the fur of that seed basically break down before the tastiness of that seed actually becomes available to the bird. However, it's really good for us as well. It is a labor of love to get that fur off and to be able to get the tastiness of the seed. It has very high vitamin C in it. And so you'll see that the staghorn has a very hairy stem, whereas the smooth leaf has a very naked stem, as we call it. It's more rubbery texture. And these grow again, around 15 to 20 feet, but they sucker and they respond really well to pruning. The more you prune it, though, the more it's going to spread. So just keep that in mind. I personally love them because they are one of our successional shrubs that help with preserving our soils. It's a band-aid to Mother Nature's soil, essentially. So here are some of the opportunities of making this. You can make it into a drink, you can make it into a jam, you can make it into this, obviously, this tea. I've heard people actually use it for medicinal purposes as well. So there's lots of uses for our native sumac. It is not a weed, okay, and it's not invasive. We have also groundnut, common groundnut. This is Apios americana. This is a ground cover. Sometimes it gets confused with vetch because it covers a ground so prolifically. The flowers look like that of a wisteria flower sometimes, a pea and wisteria-like flower. This is the best part of it, the rhizomes. These rhizomes are like that of a Jerusalem artichoke. these are what you eat. It's the potato of Maine, essentially. And this particular plant, by the way, attracts the silver-spotted skipper. So this is a butterfly that we definitely want to attract. And this is actually on a swamp milkweed in this image here. Prunus serratina, our black cherry. So this again produces beautiful black cherries. You don't want to eat them when they're red, but you can definitely eat them when they're black. And ideally, you want to cook them down to make them digestible. These are growing wildly all along our landscapes throughout New England, and they grow in salt, saline soils, essentially near the shoreline. So if you live near a body of water like a marsh, these are a great opportunity. Just be in the upland, drier environment. And they also attract these giant swallowtail. The tiger swallowtail. Beautiful larva. There's those false eyes once again. And then we're going to get into viburnums. Sometimes people are curious about viburnums. Not all viburnums are edible, but there are native ones, particularly this Casinoides, is edible for us. And this is also known as wild raisin. So again, you want to eat these when they are going to be at their darkest point, not when they're this pinky red, but when they're at the darkest blue point. And these grow in a wide spectrum of soils. Now we're in perennials and we're almost to the end. This is our famous ostrich fern that we have plentiful of in Maine, although, you know, once somebody finds a crop of this out in nature, they won't tell anybody else about them because it's their fiddleheads that they only want to have. And to be honest, you don't want to ever wipe out a crop of these ferns, of your fiddleheads, because then you won't get your fronds. So if we don't get our fronds, we won't get our spores and so forth to redevelop and continue the reproduction of this plant. So better off that you only take 3 fiddleheads to 1 bunch of fern clumps, okay? They grow in that moist condition. They can grow up to 5 feet tall. I've seen these ostrich ferns grow as tall as I am, and it's so amazing to be in a forest of fronds like this. This is our Canada mayapple. There is a Chinese variety, but the Canada mayapple is a giant leaf, and it goes dormant in the sunny or hot sun. So you want to keep it in a shady environment throughout the whole summer if you can, if you want to keep the foliage going. But the best part of this plant is the flower. That little will look like a miniature pear there, then turns into this yellow apple. And this is what you can eat. You can eat this just like any other fruit. You can make it into any compote, whatever you would like. But you have to only eat it when it's orange or yellow, I should say. When you have it in the green, it's going to actually be toxic. And that's another thing about any plants that they say that's edible. It's at a certain stage, okay? So either it's at the juvenile leaf development or the very mature fruit stage. Stinging nettle. Has anyone made stinging nettle tea? I have. It's wonderful. You can also make stinging nettle soups. It has high magnesium, so I actually take it when I have magnesium deficiency, and I have those Charlie horses when I'm sleeping, and I take stinging nettle tea, and it's a really great, effective plant for that. And again, you may not think about making the soup. There is a bit of a production out of it, I will say. You have to boil it down in order for it to not be stinging. So you're going to need to wear gloves until that point. But it's really helpful. All right. And we're getting there. And then we have Indian cucumber. And what you see is a beautiful flower. Sometimes people think this is actually Canada Mayflower. This is actually the root in which we want to harvest here. And as you can see, it's very white, but it tastes like cucumber. And you want to harvest that at about August, September timeframe. And then we have our native fox grapes. people say sometimes they don't ever see them flowering, or they don't see them fruiting. Well, they do need to have enough of the pollination. So if they're too dense and overlapping the opportunities of flowering, then the pollinators are not going to be there to pollinate them, and then you don't get fruit. So you do have to prune them specifically so in order to get that fruit. Then our giant wood aster. Our wood aster is like that of a large cordate or heart-shaped leaf, and you can use that as similar to that of a fox grape, where you can actually roll up and make your own Greek, what are they called again? The Greek grape. I can't even remember the name all of a sudden, but you can do that with the giant wood aster as well.
Domas.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And then cattails, Rosie Benson, get Gary on to harvesting those cattails out there. I did not realize this. You can use every part of this plant to eat. It's all just a matter of what stage in which you're going to harvest it and what part of it. You can treat it as a wild leek, or I should say, a wild leek essentially, or you can treat it as a, like put it in your vichyssoise if you choose. But you can also eat the pod, the actual plume of it as a like a substitute as corn on the cob. I have never tried that, so I will not attest to that experiment.
Can you do make flour out of do I recall something about the top
with the
part?
root? Yeah, with the root. I
With
don't
the
know about the
root.
flour. With the root, you can pulverize it and make it into a flour. Yes. And then speaking of leeks, here are wild leeks, also known as ramps, and these are endangered. So you do need to make sure that if you're going to grow these yourselves, that's a great thing. Do not go out and wild harvest these. These are not to be wild harvested. You have to grow these on your own property and harvest from them. These take about 8 to 10 years. Uh-oh.
I think her battery died, unfortunately, and I thought she noticed that. I hope she plugs in. We will be waiting. Wait, she's back. She's back.
I'm sorry about that. So we were almost at the end anyways, but yeah, cattails, and that was pretty much, I think, it. So I wanted to say thank you. That was all I was saying.
Well, yeah, I wondered if you noticed that you were getting on low battery.
I was noticing, but then I'm like, I have 2 more minutes. I don't know what the heck happened. I was like, you know what it is that I don't want to get into it. Anyways, I'm back and I've got power. So so
that was amazing. Yeah. And we all have, I think there's lots of questions, but
happy to ask or answer as much as I can.
Yeah, well, I have a few written down, but who, go ahead and raise your hands. Alan is clapping, but he's not raising.
Of course I'm clapping, yes. Thank you very much. That was awesome.
It was amazing, thank you, yes. And Janice has a question. She's raising her hand, and also Rosie, but you need to unmute, Janice.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Oops.
That was really wonderful. I enjoyed it a lot. I'm wondering about the witch hazel tree. It's one of my favorites. It's a native of Pennsylvania. It has wonderful yellow witchy little blooms in November and sometimes again in February. And I'm wondering if it's at all native in Maine.
Oh yeah, witch hazel is native in Maine. Our more traditional one that we see growing in the landscape is Virginiana, Hamamelis virginiana. Although we do have the spring witch hazel, Vernalis. That seems to grow in less abundance in Maine. The Virginiana is going to be the one that you see in the October, November stages. Yep.
Great. Michelle has a question.
Thanks. So I was just really curious about the ramps, like when we see ramps on these wonderful farm to table menus.
Yeah.
Do we know if they're ethically harvested?
That is a really good question. It's similar to the question when I go to nurseries, how the health of the soil is. So I think it's important that you ask where the ramps are coming from. I mean, I think it's totally justifiable to ask that question. There's that restaurant in Portland, Maine called Vinland, And I've been told that they have a farm that they do harvest it from specifically. So, but I
What
guess
was
I
it?
was also I was in the middle of the sentence too, actually, where ramps grow within a symbiotic relationship with all the bacteria and fungi. So unless that right formula in the soil is developed, it's going to take a really long time for that plant to really get to the point of being harvestable. So it's usually 5 to 8 years that you can actually harvest from your own crop that you grow.
They're delicious. What was the name of the restaurant in Portland?
Vinland, Vinland.
I
Thank
think they closed unless they
Yeah.
reopened.
Oh no,
They
really?
closed, sorry.
Oh,
Sorry.
I guess they weren't impenetrable to the pandemic, but oh well.
Yeah. Does anyone, I have a few written down, but does anyone else want to raise their hand with some questions for Irene? Oh, Mom? You take your mute off?
I noticed you had Solomon's seal in that last little slide that you got lost.
Yes. So that is so we have two different kinds of Solomon seals. We have the false Solomon seal, which is called Myanthemum, and that is actually related to Canada Mayflower, not Mayapple, but Mayflower. And so that's a leaf and a rhizome that you can eat. And that is a very similar scenario with the giant Solomon seal, which is Polygonatum, which is our more cultivated form that we have in our gardens. And what I love about that one though too is that the flowers, when they are actually looking like they're just light green, they're not even open quite yet, they're delicious. They taste like pea pods. They are so good. So I like to add them into a salad. Rather, you don't eat just all of them. You just add them as kind of an extra, a little crunch and taste, sweetness to your salad.
You have a lot of Solomon's seal, and I never knew you could eat it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
So a question I had was persimmons. Like, we love them. The French eat them. You can't ever find them around here. And if you can, they came from like Israel or something. Why aren't they growing here if they grow here?
I think it's just a matter of how they are not in production because they take so long to get going. I think they're messy. People just have had a very, I don't know that question, to be honest. I don't know the answer to that question as well as I wish I could, but just sometimes it comes down to the nurseries and just the demand for them. So, but I do know that if you go into the permaculture world, they are definitely becoming more widespread in being cultivated and sold. So.
Okay, and do you know where, so that one of the questions that was asked is like, I mean, most of us are in Maine, obviously there's Massachusetts, but like good, like reputable places to be buying these native plants that we have, that have nice soil that we can trust.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing. I never shop at one place because there's never there's never enough at one location. You know what I mean? You have to kind of dabble around, etc. So one of my favorite places to buy native is a nursery in Montville, Maine called Fernwood Nursery. Another one is called Crystal Lake Farm, and they are in Washington, Maine. Just a little bit past Morse's Sauerkraut. So get your sauerkraut before you, either on your way or coming from. And Karen Turner is the owner of Crystal Lake Farm, and she has a lot of the woodies that I mentioned. Not so much as the herbaceous, but the woodies. Woodies are the trees and shrubs. I go to O'Donnell's Nursery as kind of my go-to place. So, another place to look at is Wild Seed Project has a great resource of native plant nurseries. I don't know that they are necessarily focused that, there's never one nursery that's on native edibles, but definitely native plants. And I'm trying to think of other retail places. you know, Skillins and Esterbrookes, they're trying, but they buy so many cultivars that I don't really like to go with that as much. So it's just in Massachusetts, oh gosh, what is it called? Not Connolly's. It's Maloney's. Mahoney's. Check out Mahoney's nursery in Massachusetts. They have like 4 different locations.
Excellent. And people were asking, Brady, when you were gone, tell us what you're gonna put on the list that we're gonna send to everybody. It's like all of the plants, is that?
All those plants and more are on that list that I sent you.
Okay.
No pictures though, too much. I can't handle that. It's too big. Too big of a document. You'll have to look up at the pretty pictures yourself.
Oh, I think Dawn has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, first a shout out from the Coles to the Dixons.
Yeah.
And then a question about bog cranberries. How much water do they require? We
So
have
they don't, it's the misnomer is the fact that they refer to them as a bog because they're used in the harvesting in a bog, but they actually like sandy substrate, very well drained soils.
we're on ledge headed down toward Harpswell Sound.
Yeah, I know. So I would pick every crevice you have in your ledge outcroppings, and you will get cranberry to grow. You don't buy like you don't buy a 1 gallon pot. You have to buy little pots in order to fit them in, and so they really acclimate to the setting.
And little pots are cheaper.
Oh yes, definitely. Yep.
Okay.
And if one thing you wanted to do is you could buy one big pot, and then if you're brave enough, you can actually divide that up.
No, that would kill them.
No, come on, Don. Have a little faith in your technique.
No, I've killed plenty of plants. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any? I have a couple more written down, but I'm sure there's a couple more questions in there. Someone else must have something. Oh, Lorraine?
Yeah, but Erica, I'd like to leave mine till the end because it's not really related to edibles for people. It's more edibles for pollinators.
That's okay. No, you ask your question, Lorraine.
Okay, well, Brady, have you heard anything about the No Mow Maine movement?
My husband just texted it to me. I'm like, what the heck is happening here? That's so funny.
Oh, really? So
yeah, he literally just texted it to me. I don't know. So I'm not familiar with that nonprofit organization, but NOMO is essentially taking advantage of everything that I just talked to you about and more, and replacing your lawn with these plants.
And No Mow Maine is to not mow your lawn during the month of May. And apparently it's supposed to be really, really good for pollinators.
Yes, because of so there's a lot of larvae that is overwintering, and as well as the plumes of your grass starts to become a pollinator haven. So it depends on what kind of grasses you have, to be honest. So
we have a neighbor who's not going to mow in May. I'm thinking of joining her.
Yeah. Well, especially with so many people in Maine. I mean, I don't know if you've looked at your backyard, but mine is 50% moss. So I don't really mow until about June anyway. So.
and Lorraine, you might have noticed all those years, I never mowed the lawn until at least July 1st.
Oh, you were so good, Stephen.
I know, I was way ahead of my time. Way ahead of my time.
So another question, Brady, was I know you've talked about like places, but are there, and you said a couple of books, but are there any, would you have any books that you suggest or websites that you suggest for us to?
There's a great website called the Ecological Landscape Alliance. And that is a website that you can find a lot of resources or publications. I will say that the University of Maine Cooperative Extension has become more updated and progressive with getting native plant publications out there. So I would definitely look at their website, University of Maine Cooperative Extension. And it's free and you download them and yay, yay, yay.
Do you guys at the botanical gardens, do you have classes?
Oh yeah, I shouldn't mention that.
Yeah.
So yeah, yes, I think I mentioned that in the beginning of the presentation. I've coordinated 80 classes, and most of our classes are on native plants. We have a certificate program in native plants and ecological horticulture. You don't necessarily have to be in the program, but if you really want to get a comprehensive, training, you can enroll in the certificate. You take the classes, you don't have to be enrolled. I believe the next class is actually on horticultural ecology and natural communities of Maine. Oh, that's a really good book. I think it's called Natural Landscapes and Ecosystems of Maine, and it was published by the NRCS of Maine. So I would definitely check that resource out. It's funny, my mind kind of goes blank when people ask me that because there's just so much out there, and I have some of my go-to books. What I'll do is, why don't I send you a reference list, Erica, before you send out the plant list, and then you can send it
Awesome.
all together.
Thanks, Brady. And
Yeah.
your bro has a question, and that would be amazing to have the reference list. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Then because we're all writing furiously on our little piece of paper. So thank you. So Michael.
Sorry.
Or Mike, sorry. I just see the Michael up there, but I know it's
I
Mike.
call him Michael.
I just want to note that the only reason that Stephen Dixon didn't mow his lawn until July is because all his kids left the house. So he didn't mow it himself. But I had heard, and I'd be interested in your commentary, Brady, that one of the reasons we have something called pink lemonade these days is because Sumac tea used to be so popular that people wanted to sort of replicate that without going through the trouble of harvesting sumac. Secondly, I would note for anyone sort of anywhere within the Lincoln County area of Maine that I'm sharing a secret tip I vowed to keep secret to my wife, but we haven't been able to go harvest. The Marsh River Bog Preserve has a lovely set of cranberries that we once saw very ripe and very unharvested. So if anyone has a chance to walk that at the right time of year, you might save yourself some of your own planting. We already mentioned that Vinland is unfortunately closed. And then Brady, the other thing I wanted to see if you had any comment on is fungi. You didn't mention any, and I'm just wondering if you have any tips on, where we might find some expertise or good resources on edible.
The Maine Mycological Association, or the Maine Mycology Association, is what I would recommend. Guy named, what's his name? Jim Fecto, and then David, just look up Maine Mycology Association, and that will be a wonderful resource. I don't ever talk about mycology because I'm not a mycologist, and so I will not make those. Yeah, that's like a world
I hear
unto
that's
itself.
smart.
Yeah, it's a world unto itself, and right now, to be honest, one thing you could go out and harvest is turkey, the turkey tail mushroom. It's going rampant right now on our stumps of our trees. But as everyone in the mycology world will say, there are lots of lookalikes. So you have to be super, super cautious. So but we are also having a fungi ecology class in October this summer. So come take that. You'll learn so much more.
And what about the pink lemonade question? Now I'm curious.
Yeah, that sounded rhetorical. I think Mike hit the nail on the head. I am not familiar with the fact that there's these trends or these old days and coming back into that, but it makes sense to me. I've definitely had sumac tea, and it's delicious. It's, again, anything of our native plants are gonna have a tartness to them. So you want to add a little honey or a little mint. And you know, I didn't even get into so many more perennials. As Erica will say, my presentation was longer and I combed it down as drastically as I possibly could. But I had a lot more perennials on the list, but it's just too much to cover. So come take classes from us and you'll learn so much more. And we have online classes as well, not just in person. So if you live in Lexington and hey, Jean, is Jean gone? Oh, Jean left. She can be a testimonial for us. She's one of our dedicated volunteers who comes from Arlington, comes up to Maine all the time. So.
And you guys have so many volunteers there. I mean, like.
Yeah, we have about 220.
Wow. Well,
and we're very fortunate. Yeah. And we now finally have a staff of about 14 horticulturists, which is the biggest we've ever had, but it's 300 acres. So.
Wow. Well, we have a lot of wonderful volunteers, not quite as many as that, but we actually we did have 100 unique volunteers last year, although, and a lot of them came a lot of times, and some of them were students who came.
Right. Well, that's the thing. You have those who are repeat, helpers like Annie, who just come and help out. And then there are the one-offs sometimes. So you take what you can get and be very grateful. That's what it's.
Exactly. Well, this
we couldn't exist without them. That's for sure.
We could not. And I kind of want everyone to take their mute off and thank Irene Brady for this amazing talk. It went by so quickly, and I wish you could have talked more, but it was amazing.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you. Very good.